Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to the Spiritist Society of Baltimore, our Saturday night live, not to be confused with SNL and ABC or whatever channel that's on. Today, we are continuing our study on the book Times of Health and Conscientiousness. But before we begin, we always like to open up with a prayer and a brief reading from the book Happy Life, or just a book of messages, just to set the tone for this evening. And I am introducing myself. I am the speaker this evening with our blessed mentors and all of you dear friends that are with us this evening. We are so happy. So please join me. I shall be doing a brief reading, like I said, from Happy Life. First edition of Happy Life, page 162. Joanna says, repeat the poorly done lesson without any bitterness. Learning takes place in many ways. Quote, trial and error is the most common and normal one. In the area of moral events, the process occurs in the same way. A mistake made today and corrected through a repetition of the experience is a lesson never forgotten. Wow, dear friends, we opened up that message completely without prior preparation, if you will. And it is a great foreshadowing of today's lecture. So join me in this prayer that we offer up to our divine Creator, our Father, Mother God, to our spirit mentors and guides of the SSB, and of course, always we turn our hearts and our minds over to our model and guide, Jesus. We ask for your guidance, your protection, and inspiration this evening. And may all those who are connected virtually, wherever they may be, in either realms of life, may they feel the uplifting message this evening. May their hearts be touched. May they be inspired to have more courage, more patience, and more virtues. In Jesus' name, so be it. Dear friends, tonight's lecture, much like all of our other lectures we've given with this book by Joanna de Angelis. There we go. Let's wait for my PowerPoint to pop up. Times of Health and Conscientiousness. It always seems like an appropriate time, any time of the day, year, to talk about such a topic. But today we're going to be discussing specifically Chapter 9. And it's a very much chapter that I would highly recommend anyone to read alongside the book Evolution in Two Worlds. Because in this Chapter 9, we talk about the feeling of guilt, the emotion of guilt, what it does to us, how it impacts us from one life to the next, how it impacts our mental health and our physical health. And it really, in a very small sentence at the very end of the chapter, Joanna references our mind and how everything starts in the mind. And that's why we say, if you get a moment more than a moment, to study the book Evolution in Two Worlds, you'll begin to see in many of the chapters, and every chapter, but specifically a few chapters that deal with the mind, the brain, and the power, and at the evolutionary process, how and why our mind and brain and central nervous system, how it all goes into play, and how powerful we are, how powerful our thoughts are and our abilities are. And if we could just, like a dial on a radio or any type of dial, if we could just tune it to serve us better, instead of it, we're being a slave to our own guilt, we could do so much and heal a lot faster. But don't take my word for it. let's read and study Joanna and see what she has to say. And she starts out this chapter, like all of her chapters, with positive affirmations. And we believe she does this for a multitude of reasons. Positive affirmations are good for us. They set the tone before we begin to read and study a particular chapter, and just to remind ourselves, because sometimes we go into situations from the, if you will, from the outside, from the inside out. So we begin to read a chapter with bias, but instead, by doing these affirmations, perhaps on some level, it allows us to have more of a bird's eye view looking in. So that way we don't have that bias. And so we're just have an open heart, ready to learn whatever message is being brought in this particular chapter. So join me as we do these positive affirmations. You can, if you wish, as you're sitting at your desk or home, wherever you are, you can place your hand over your heart. You can close your eyes and you can just repeat after me, or you can simply read off the screen as well. But if you are in a space where you feel safe, read it out loud or repeat after me, because it does wonders. So let's start like this. Joanna says, divine consciousness showers me with peace. Divine consciousness showers me with peace. My misconceptions are clarified, and I am at peace as I ponder the countless options for inner harmony within my reach. Before me lies the present, preparing the future. The past entails the lessons learned, and the advantages of that knowledge provide me with support for inner growth. I trust and renew myself at peace in the good. Take a deep breath in and out. Divine consciousness showers us with peace. Let us keep that in mind as we begin our deep dive or semi-dive into chapter 9 from Joanna de Angelis. She starts out talking to us about guilt. I apologize, my animation here was opposite. But she starts out by saying, among all other inner scourges that torment humans, producing unnameable afflictions, the guilty conscience stands out. It insidiously takes root like an acid. It corrodes the gears of the emotions, fostering the eruption of maddening inner conflicts, arising from psychological insecurity in judging one's own actions. A guilty conscience opens an abyss between what has been done and what should not have been done, cruelly flogging those who suffer its dogged persecution. Due to their own weaknesses, individuals allow themselves incorrect behaviors that appeal to their sensations. But as soon as they cease, they surrender to self-punitive regret, trying to correct their foolishness and being immediately assailed by a guilty conscience. And this is what it is. In layman's terms, the power of guilt, which is in our mind, the power and the harm that this persistent guilt can have on us, has an effect on our physical body. And within science and within research and within psychology, if you will, there's this embodiment theory or emotional embodiment theory. And that is basically that, and this is what we're sharing here on the screen, that we use our own bodily experiences and processes to understand our own emotional experience. and the experiences of others, has provided a mechanism to help us understand emotional processing. This theory emphasizes the impact of the body on emotional experience and postulates that emotions are constructed from multimodal endpoints. So here, this is from a scientific perspective, but we know it's about the mind and it getting manifested in the physical body. When we have that guilt that is tormenting us, it creates, as Joanna says, these insidious difficulties that take root. And when you think about a plant, when you think about the root of a plant, those plants tend to, let's pretend we're talking about a plant that's in the actual ground, not in a pot. Those roots can run deep. As the old phrase goes, still waters run deep, right? So those roots go really far down, and that's the same in the situation with our emotions when we're holding on to guilt. They take root and can cause us a lot of pain and afflictions and issues, notwithstanding the uh, the law of cause and effect, action and reaction, the very things that we have to pay back, not even taking that into account, but just the mere act of feeling guilty and being in this rumination, we're going through pain. On top of, at some point, when we have to go through the reparation process and pay back our quote unquote moral debts. So we're saying all this to say is that for us to be cognizant and aware that what we feel inside always will ultimately manifest on the outside, on our perispirit, and then to our physical body. So it is this idea of self-punishment. And Joanna goes on to say, perversely, it punishes the offender inwardly, but it does not alter the course of the action's consequences, nor does it make things right with the injured party. In other words, like we were just saying, we may feel pain from guilt. We may go through a lot of inner turmoil and a lot of mental pain, but that doesn't even begin to do anything for, making things right. It doesn't make things even between the injured party. So just because I'm crying with guilt and I'm ridden with just guilt and just ruminating in it, and my life is ruined because I can't get over it, I can't forgive myself, that doesn't do anything to the actions that have already transpired. What's happened has already happened. The person or persons who I've hurt have been hurt. It doesn't take away their hurt. It's just an experience that I have with myself, with my own emotions. And this is important as we begin to talk about self-healing. Joanna goes on to say, on the contrary, despite being an unforgiving creditor, it unconsciously arouses new desires, repeated behaviors, and ever increasing punishment. Self-punishment is an atavism of hypocritical, religious, moral, and social behaviors, which do not hesitate to make the wrong recommendation. Thus, it must be eliminated thoroughly and immediately. This is a really important concept to grasp here, okay? Because Joanna says that, and so two things. There's a misconception both by the one who's doing the wrong and perhaps by society at large, that when a person feels guilty, that's enough to pay back the wrong that they have done. And it's not. That's not the case. And what also happens is that those who have this cycle of, committing a wrong, feeling really, really guilty for it, and punishing themselves, but then going right back to it again. So it's like this never ending cycle of doing wrong. Oh, I hate myself for it. But then doing it again and then punishing myself. And it's a never ending cycle. And Joanna says it's an atavistic behavior that we've learned over time, whether through, as she says, religious, moral, or social behaviors. Either we've learned it in our society, the culture that we live in, or the religion that we are brought up with. Um, and that type of behavior, this type of cycle, does us no good, does not serve us in any way, and really, as Joanna says, needs to be eliminated and rooted out. So how do we do that? We need to acknowledge, and we're going to talk about that here in just a moment. But as we get into this idea of right and wrong, we have to acknowledge the law of cause and effect. So throughout the world, there are different ideas on this, right? There's karma, law of cause and effect. There's Newton's law, action and reaction. When you're pushing against the ground, the reaction of the ground pushing on you. There's that physical law. And then there, in other cultures, in the Indian, one of the religions, I believe it's Hindu. I'm blanking on it at this moment, but there's the famous book, the Bhagavad-Gita. It's actually a very inspiring spiritual book. And one of the quotes we've taken from it is, no one who does good work will ever come to a bad end, either here or in the world to come. So it's this idea that exists throughout different cultures, belief systems across the globe, and various different religions, as we can see, that there is this idea of, we do something good or bad, and then there's a reaction to it. But in Spiritism, we learn also about something really important. It's this grace that God gives us, the attenuation of that we have this ability to not pay an eye for an eye. This the old law, right? But Spiritism, and when Jesus came, and when Spiritism was, codified, we learned about this ability that exists within the divine laws, that we are able to mitigate and attenuate the things that we've done that are wrong by being a better person, by working on ourselves, which we're gonna talk about here in a second. But it's this first step that we need to take, is acknowledging what we have done as wrong. And it's this, and if you can see this picture here that we're showing of this girl embracing her shadow, it's metaphoric, because our shadow, which is one of the archetypes that Jung brought and Joanna often refers to, it's that unconscious, what lies beneath the surface of all of us. And it's embracing who we are, not saying that I'm going to just accept everything I do as great, but accepting who we are in order for us to acknowledge it, to be able to change, because we cannot change what we don't acknowledge. So much like this picture, we have to learn to embrace our shadow self. And when you hear nowadays, which is a pretty popular term, people talk about shadow work that they're doing. It's basically just this really deep inner work of self-acceptance, acknowledging who we are, and being able to make changes, being able to forgive ourselves for not knowing at the time when we did wrong. But now that we know, we must do better. And therein comes also this idea of the law of karma, too, like we discussed. But within Spiritism, before we get into that, we know that the definition of karma, it's expression from among the Hindus, meaning action or deed in Sanskrit. And it implies cause and effect. Every action or movement is a result of a previous causes or stimuli. But in Spiritism, we look at the law of cause and effect. And we learn with Allan Kardec that reason tells us that an intelligent effect must have an intelligent force as its cause. And so when we look at individual and collective accounts, and this refers to us, the accounts of our lives, of what we've done. So if you think of like a major organization, like a company, and they have their account balances, they have a tally. So when we talk about the law of cause and effect, and we're talking about individual and collective accounts, peoples and races, institutional account, all these are discussed in the Spirits book, as well as in the book Action and Reaction. and how that pertains to our lives and the law of cause and effect. And in the book Action and Reaction, mentor Sanzio says the following: for us, it means the account we all must pay, including our debts and credits. There are accounts of this kind not only listing and defining individual persons, but also peoples and races, states and institutions. And in the Spirits book, we learn about individual and collective um, calamities that occur. And we learn that individuals that have similar, if you will, karmic debts, if you will, if we can use that term, even though karma is not a spiritist term per se, but those who have done similar wrongs in the past can come together or brought together, and sometimes this can take centuries, hundreds of years, and they pay back a debt collectively. That's why when we see a large calamity or an earthquake in a particular region, that a bunch of people die in this one little particular area, we know that those people have been drawn back together for those collective reasons. So it's something for us to think about when we think about spiritism. We talk about the law of cause and effect, and we also remember the grace that God bestows upon us, the reincarnation, our ability to come back again and again, to reframe, redo, revisit. It's a do-over, if you will, in a sense. It's an opportunity for us to pay back our debts. Now, we can go the really long way about it and be really rebellious and say, oh, I'm going to do what I want to do. I don't care about anyone else. God allows us free will. We can choose that. All that does, it keeps us farther and longer away from our own happiness. That's all that it does. We can have our experience, absolutely. And sometimes we have our own path to walk. And that's what it is. But if we can take the opportunity of this life and make it our own and do our best and actually do good, we can start talking and looking at and learning about something in the book Action Reaction. They talk about mitigated debts. We wanted to bring this really kind of crazy story, for lack of a better term, but it's such a fascinating, true account in the book Action Reaction that is recounted. So bear with us as we just go through. This is in chapter 16 of the book Action and Reaction, and this is the case of Adelino Correa, and he is a active worker at his Spiritist Center. And Andrea Louise, Eladio, and Silas, and the instructor, they go and they are observing this particular worker, and he's so dedicated, and he's a simple man, shy, kind of sad, but very dedicated, very kind, very charitable. But they notice that he has a very severe form of a skin condition that's called eczema. This chronic skin disease where people are plagued by these red, itchy, dry patches. Sometimes can be extremely painful depending upon the severity of each case. So you can have very mild to more extreme cases. And he had more so on the more severe case, but not entirely wasn't as bad as it totally could be, as we learn. And we're going to learn here in just a second why that is. So we learn about who was Adelino Correa. So Andrea Louise looks at him and has been observing him, looks at his life, looks at how dedicated in this life he is to his Spiritist Center, how much he gives to others, how much he's constantly thinking about his proverbial neighbor, constantly thinking about others to the detriment of himself. Why that is. And Silas and Eladio and Andrea Louise go to Adelino's house to even kind of look at his situation a little bit further, to the conditions that he's living in as well. very, very humble. They go to the Adelino's home, and they see that he has 3 children. And when they go into the room, they see this little girl with 2 other little Afro-descendant children. And Andre Luis is confused, and he was like, we see Adelino's here at home. Isn't he married? And I said he was, but the wife left. And Adelino also had come across in his comings and goings, if you will, and he had adopted these 2 little Afro-descendant children. So he had this little daughter, Marisa, and then the 2 adopted sons. He had Mario and Raul, that he loved so deeply. He loved all his children, but he was doing it now since his wife had left him when their daughter was just about 3 years old. So they had been doing it. He has been taking care of Marisa, his daughter, as well as these 2 adopted boys for quite some time on his own, but completely a devoted and loving father and worker. But Andre Luis is so confused, and also, excuse me, a newborn son as well. But looking at this scene, Andre Luis is so confused, and why this is all happening to this apparently great man who's like this, courageous person who's so kind, so loving. Like, why is this happening? Why is God punishing him? So Sila says, okay, well, we need to go back. We need to go back in the records of his life to reveal the actions that have been taken in his previous life, one in particular, that brought about his current condition. So they talk about in the 19th century, the current Adelino was the illegitimate son of a very wealthy man who owned many slaves. And his name was Martin Gaspar Sr. Martin had an illegitimate son with one of his slaves. He had many, but for some reason, in which they don't share that context, for some reason, he's very attached to this one particular son that that Martin Gaspar Sr. had after violating one of his many slave girls. So he took to this child, raised him as his own. It was his own, but at that time that was very unheard of, because you would never legitimize a Afro-descendant illegitimate child as your own, as a Caucasian person at that time during slavery. So he raises him, he legitimizes him, he even makes him the heir to all of his things, and they become the absolute best of friends. Whether they're home or they're hunting, no matter where they are the absolute best of friends. And the father and him have a great relationship. So soon as the Martin Jr., who is the present day Adelino, he grows up, and Martin Gaspar Sr., his father, decides to get married later in life, and he marries a very irresponsible, immature 20-year-old, someone who's like half his age, and her name was Maria Emilia. Adelino at that time, his name was Martin Jr. He was obviously named after his father. Well, what happened is that once the father, Martin Gaspar Sr., brought his new wife home on the plantation, his son, Martin Jr., had this unexplainable connection, desire for his stepmother, who was just a year younger than him. And so she also had the same feelings for him. So long story short, his Martin and Maria Emilia, they plotted to kill Martin Gaspar. And they got the help of 2 farmhands, Antonio and Lucidio, who were also not great people. They also were abusers of the slaves. And with their help, they gave the Martin Gaspar Sr., they gave him a sedative while he fell asleep. with the help of Antonio and Lucidio. They put gasoline all over the father in the room, in the home, and they burned him in his sleep. And Martin Gaspar died a horrendous and horrific death. But when he died, let's go back one second. When he died, he continued to actually harbor that anger against his son and tormented him for years and years until Martin Jr.'s own death. And we'll explain that here in a second. And Maria Amelia, who was previously his lover, if you will, his father's wife, whom had also schemed together to kill Martin Gaspar Sr., was now in present life Adelino Correa's daughter, and Mario and Raul were the farmhands from the past. So this connection came from a distant past, as we can see, that through the grace of God and his goodness and all that happens through reincarnation, we are able to see how everything that we do comes back to us. And no matter how small, how big, or if we were ignorant at the time, there is the law of cause and effect. But the beauty of this story, and we also can say, we forgot to mention, Adelino also accepts another newborn son, an adopted son, which I believe is Martin Gaspar Sr., his previous father. But they explain why in this life Adelino has this eczema. And the reason for it is because he carries that guilt within his subconscious mind that even when he died as Martin Jr. in the 19th century, being obsessed by his deceased father who he murdered, even before he died, he became so attached mentally to his deceased father that he began to experience the same death that his father experienced, the burning, that even before Martin Jr. died, the skin condition, these boils, these burning, like almost as if his skin was being burned off, began to appear. And doctors didn't know why at that time, but we know, being explained, that his obsession was so profound with his deceased father because of his guilt, and because the father was still so incredibly angry, caused this within him that was in his paraspirit as well. So in this lifetime, he came back with that eczema. And one of the things we learned from Mentor Silas is the following. We wanted to bring this text for us to better understand. So Silas says, in reference to Adelino in this life, because he spends his days so usefully, Adelino has merited the mitigation of his congenital disease, his eczema. After suffering for so long the paraspiritual trauma of remorse for having set his father's body on fire, he fostered within himself strange mental flames, which, as I have already said, punished him intensely beyond the grave. That is why he reincarnated with skin tormented by burning vibrations, expressed early on in his new physical form by an extreme type of eczema. Due to his extensive debt, the disease should have covered his entire body for many painful decades to come. But through the merit he is acquiring, it hasn't taken on proportions that would keep him from working and learning, because he has won the joy of continuing to serve through his willing efforts in the constant sowing of the good. This is what we're talking about when we talk about mitigated debt. And when we mitigate something, we lessen the effect. That is by its definition. We are lessening the effects. So because in this life he had already accepted, and had begun to be a responsible, loving individual in this lifetime, dedicated in the service of others at his Spiritist Center, in serving his children, despite the fact being abandoned by his former wife, and doing all this on his own, he still continued. They go into depth about his current life and how his loving vibration is felt by many, how he's admired for his humility, and how that behavior, that change within him lessened his pain that he was supposed to have gone through this physical experience of his eczema, through this physical illness. So when we talk about how unhealthy guilt can be, because it keeps us in this loop, if Adelino had stayed with that guilt and not just accepted what he did and tried to make reparations, he wouldn't be in the current state that he's in now, where he's in the process of repairing and bringing reparations to those whom he has harmed and re-educating the lives of those who was his accomplices. His previous stepmother turned lover is now his daughter, and the two farmhands who he utilized to kill his father in the 19th century, one of the incarnations, are now his two adopted sons, whom he loves and takes care of and educates as any dedicated father would, as well as his newborn son. So it's this love, it's this choice that we have. And it's the idea of spilled milk. And I'm not sure if anyone, probably most people, at least who are from the American culture, I should say, or from North America, have probably heard of that phrase of, don't cry over spilled milk. Milk that's already, milk in a glass that, tips over and it falls. Like, well, the milk is spilled on the floor. There's nothing you can do. So either we can sit and be upset about it and ruminate it and continuously cry about it, but that doesn't do anything. But what does is acknowledging, you know what? The milk is spilled and I did it. And let me try to do better. Let me acknowledge that, XYZ took me to the decisions to spill this milk, but now I want to work on myself and be better. So Joanna says and reminds us of the following, and this is this idea of spilled milk. And she says, you cannot prevent or avoid what you have already done. Once the arrow is released, it follows its trajectory. Therefore, determine the effects and rectify them when negative. If your action was reproachable, take measures to correct it as soon as you can. If your attitude was the result of a personal conflict that does not correspond to what you believe or who you are, practice balance and stay vigilant. So we cannot take back what's already been done. Once words have been said, actions have been taken, as much as we might try to spend hours and hours trying to think about how we should have, could have, would have done things differently, it does not change what already has transpired. What Joanna says is the following: is let's take an inventory, determine what are the effects of these actions, and if they're negative, rectify them, fix them. So in other words, if you've done something wrong, acknowledge it and try to fix it as best you can. If some might say, well, I did XYZ and this person is no longer on the earth. Okay, acknowledge that you've done that wrong and do your best for the rest of this lifetime. Help others. Some might say, well, I neglected my elderly father and now he's already passed on in the spirit realm. Okay. Well, there's lots of people in nursing homes that are forgotten about. Maybe volunteer there. Maybe help others who have been forgotten, other elderly people. Just a suggestion. There are lots of ways we can practice charity, love, and compassion. And that's what Adelino did. And it's not just like, I did something wrong, let me fix it by just doing some charity, and boom, things are great. It's much more profound than that. When we practice love, compassion, and charity, it alters who we are forever. It alters that. There's science behind this. It alters who we are. It's good to be good. And one of the researchers, scientists who sort of came about with many publications on this is Dr. Stephen Post on his scientific evidence of goodness, or what we might refer to as charity, that he found how good it is for us to volunteer and how good it is for our mental, emotional, and physical health. That science has proven that it's good to be good. When we are good to others, when we practice compassion, understanding, charity, all those things are good for us. And we can see that in the case of Adelino. He didn't stay ruminating on what he had done with his father, because what was done was done. And through the physical body, he was cleansing his perispirit, if you will, of the past through the eczema. But it was completely mitigated. It should have been a lot worse because he had completely become a different person. Compassionate, loving, charitable towards his neighbor. And that is the idea, for us to attain that. But as you can see on my slide, you might, on this suggestions on how to forgive yourself, because you might say, well, I've done XYZ and I don't know how to forgive myself. I'm stuck in it. What do? I need some practical things. Well, that's okay. If you've come to that conclusion and you say, Kirsten, I feel guilty and I just cannot let it go. I feel so bad. Well, there's a lot of tips and things we can do. And this is just one of hundreds of thousands of things that you could find on the internet or any self-help books. And this is a particular one from Ivan Martins. This is the 5 suggestions. Releasing negativity. So being honest about what happened, what you've done, will not only help you release the negativity, but also give you closure. It's like a weight that gets taken off your shoulders. 2, accept the unacceptable. When you come to terms with the fact that you cannot change the past, it will set you free, but also help you become the best version of yourself. Learn your lesson. If you don't take your time to learn the lesson or try to avoid what the situation is telling you, you will experience the same thing over and over again. And Joanna confirms that. Until we acknowledge what we've done is wrong, we'll be in this continuous loop of doing something wrong, feeling guilty, punishing ourselves, and then being tempted and just doing that wrong thing again. And it goes on for sometimes lifetimes. And number 4, move forward. You can't change what happened, but you can change your attitudes and actions in the present, much like Adelino, who was Martin Gaspar Jr. in the past. Self-compassion. In order to be more kinder to yourself, you need to commit to talking with yourself in a way that's helpful rather than harmful. And we would add in a number 6, be charitable. As we were just sharing about the research from Dr. Stephen Post, and we know that one of the divine laws in part 3 of the Spirit's book, the law of love, compassion, and justice, when we practice that, that modifies us and modifies our trajectory in this life and future lives and makes us better. So there's absolutely no reason not to engage and not to learn how to be more compassionate, to learn how to love ourselves and others. We have everything to gain from it, and only all our negative vices to lose. That's what's at stake. Just for something for us to ponder on. But as we continue on, Joanna's amazing message from this book, we deem these the following psychological facts from Joanna. She says the following: weak are all who consider themselves weak, but do not put forth the effort to become strong. So if you think you're weak and you don't put the effort forth to become strong, that's why you're weak. In that small book of messages called Happy Life that we often read, as we did today, in that particular book, there's a chapter in where Joanna talks about willpower. And she says, if you feel your willpower is weak, it's because you haven't been exercising it. We have not been exerting enough effort to become stronger. We are weak because we consider ourselves to be weak and we don't put forth the effort. It's a truth. It's a fact. If you excuse your mistake with self-punishment in order to appease the guilt, you will soon make it again. It's the cycle. If we punish ourselves and say, oh my gosh, I'm so terrible, I'm so bad, instead of acknowledging that what we did was wrong, we're just going to commit the same mistake again, over and over and over again. We punish ourselves to appease our guilt, but we're just going to do it again. We have to break the cycle. The cycle must be broken by us, by me, myself, and I, us as individuals. And her advice is, look at life as it is and your circumstances as they are. Eradicate from your mind all ideas that you consider inappropriate, harmful, or dysfunctional. Make a real effort to replace them with others that are healthy, balanced, and dignified. Now, in order for us to eradicate something from our mind, we first must acknowledge that it exists. Because Joanna is not, and never does, teach about suppression or repression. That doesn't work. Whatever we suppress or repress comes back up. We have to acknowledge all the different parts of ourselves. Whatever we find to be inappropriate, harmful, dysfunctional, as she says, and make an effort to replace them with something healthy, balanced, and dignified. Because we may have parts of ourselves that have these old habits that are negative, vices, what have you. But likewise, we also have a lot of positive parts within us. Our virtues are the parts of us that do have goodness. Because we all have some goodness within us. So it's learning to make those parts talk louder and help them to become stronger. And we will begin to weaken our vice because the goodness will speak louder within us. When you do not have a collection of lofty thoughts to ponder, you are overcome by thoughts of a venal, childish, pernicious nature, which become familiar. So there's this old saying that idle hands are the devil's playground. So if we aren't working on doing good, if we aren't working on having healthier thoughts about ourselves, about others, if we aren't living our lives with the intention to be more positive, to connect with things that are more uplifting, that have purpose and meaning, that are good for me, good for others, then I'm just going to be perpetuating old bad habits. And chances are they are negative. And then they become familiar. And then it becomes second nature. And then we become even unaware that we're doing it. And the opposite, the same happens with goodness. The more and more we do it and practice it, the more and more we actively work on being more positive and connecting to things that are more uplifting. At some point, it'll become second nature. But as they say, buyer beware. The opposite can happen as well. We can become so used to all that negativity that it becomes so familiar to us. And when something becomes familiar, it's very hard to let go of. And if that were not the case, we would not have the vast array of addictions and the monumental issue of addictions in this world and all other negative vices, which there is a plethora. There's so many that we could name. So it becomes familiar to us. So it's kind of like someone that's living in a bad situation, but they don't really want to leave because they do, but at the same time, it's so familiar. They're comfortable there. It becomes an issue of not wanting to change or get out of your comfort zone. We are creatures of habit by nature. We like to do what is familiar to us. So sometimes that means we have to be willing to let go of what is familiar and embrace good things. And it's going to feel like unfamiliar, strange, sitting in that space, doing things differently. But hold on, keep doing it. If it's something good, if it's something to add to us for being help us to be a better person, let's do it. Nowhere in the text does Joanna say it's going to be easy. Absolutely. It's not. It's going to be really difficult. If it were easy, humanity would not be in the state that it's in now. We all would not be here. We would be in some higher plane, living it up with St. Michael, wherever. But the fact is that it is hard to change. It's okay to acknowledge that. It takes effort. Surround yourself with people who want to do better, who are striving for inner spiritual greatness, who are trying to be a better person to the best of their ability. Because what we bring around us affects us and it influences us. Whether we realize it or not, Joanna says, people influence us. You can deny it to the cows come home. But those that are around us influence us. Bottom line. So what are we doing to live more intentionally, to change our habits, to change the vibrations that we surround our own selves with by our own inner workings? And forgive me, I forgot this last little piece here, which Joanna says. I'll read the whole thing again. When you do not have a collection of lofty thoughts to ponder, you are overcome by thoughts of venal, childish, pernicious nature, which become familiar and drive you to act accordingly. Of course, it becomes second nature, like we shared. So we have to be willing to break the cycle. And we see this in many non-religious or spiritual aspects. When we look at traumatic family life from one generation to the next, and it takes one person to just break that cycle so that their future generations and they themselves can begin to experience healthiness, health, well-being, positive and uplifting patterns and cycles of behavior. But we have to be willing to accept and want that change. So it comes down to this self-acceptance and seeing things for as they really are and being okay with that and taking up our cross and let's walk and let's do better. We had a friend who used to always have this phrase that whenever you did something bad, she would always say, "Okay, do better." That was her thing. It was never "Oh gosh, I can't believe you did that. Oh, you're so terrible." She'd always just say, "Okay, it happened. Do better. Do better next time." And that should be our motto. Let's do better. Let's just do better. And here we're sharing just some final affirmations for self-forgiveness. These affirmations are wonderful and fantastic. I am human. These are reminders for ourselves. I am human. I acted in the best way I was capable of in that moment. I have grown as a person. I am grateful for increased insight and opportunity to make a better choice from now on. I accept this about myself. I allow myself to be at peace with this. I forgive myself. That is what we need to do. Accept what may have been done, because you might say, well, I don't know what I've done in past lives. I don't have any memory of it. That's okay. Let us pay attention to our habits in this life alone. Where our tendencies are. Take stock of that. Take an inventory of what you lean towards. And if you lean towards good things, but there are aspects of yourself that might lean toward not so good things, let's work on it. Sometimes not sometimes, they've even found through research that even just journaling, writing stuff down, really helps to bring clarity. And it's kind of like when you are in a new class. Let's say you're taking college class and you're taking a genetics class. The mere act of writing things out and talking through things helps us to understand ourselves and these deeper concepts because we are millennial beings. We've lived many lifetimes and we are complex, but we are also lovable and have the opportunity to love others as well. And as a final thoughts from Joanna, she says, every achievement starts in the mind. Designed on the mental plane, it materializes at the first opportunity. Therefore, think correctly, letting go of any unhealthy ideas that will create a guilty conscience. Whenever you err, make a mistake, start over with the enthusiasm you had at the start. Dignity, harmony, and balance between conscience and conduct come at a price. Perseverance in your duty. If, however, you have difficulty in acting correctly due to a deeply rooted attitude, turn to prayer with serenity, and divine consciousness will uplift you to peace. Every achievement starts in the mind. It all starts in the mind. All of it. That is where it all stems from, our mind, and all the lifetimes that we've lived, and all the memories and baggage we brought with us. It starts in our mind. So we have to be willing to be cognizant, to be aware of the thoughts we're harboring, the thoughts that we're feeding, so we can change them. And if we're finding difficulty in that, turn to prayer. Prayer is one of the most underused tools because it's free and it's simple and people don't give it much credence or much value. But it has tremendous value in the ability to lift us up. Whether we pray for ourselves, which is very important, or praying in a group, or praying for others, it has power. Never forget that. And that we have the power to change our minds and our lives. So, dear friends, we thank you so much for this opportunity to share with you. And normally we would do a Q&A session, and normally we would have a back and forth. But today we wanted to try to do something a little bit different. Because when we talk about dealing with a guilty conscience, when we talk about dealing with the heaviness, it really can produce a lot of anguish for so many of us. And for those who are listening, or those who are listening to the recorded version of this, might be enduring an inner battle. So we wanted to take a moment to also recommend that we be cognizant, of how hard life can be. And then we can, in this moment, also have this moment of meditation, have this moment to reflect, and we can share and comment on the questions and the comments that were shared by some of our viewers this evening. Once our live is done, we will address them. But we really want to take this moment for all the minds that are connected right now, that have an immense weight. And sometimes that comes in the form of a mental illness, of a depression, or some other type of illness, whether in the physical body. Because we carry with us this heavy, emotional, mental baggage and guilt that's not serving us. But we need to dust off our knees, our hands, and get up, rise up, and accept what is and begin again. So join me in this short meditation, and you can close your eyes wherever you are, get into a comfortable position, either sitting down in a chair, or if you prefer, you're in a safe space, you can lie down as well. And this is just a short meditation on self-forgiveness, self-love. And whether in your mind's eye or physically, you can place your hand over your heart. As you take in a deep breath through your nose and out through your mouth, let us repeat the following. I am a child of God. I am loved by my Creator. I wish to forgive myself and ask for forgiveness in return. I am a child of God. I am deserving of love, joy, and happiness. Although I might have made mistakes in the current or distant past, I wish to live more intentionally in this life, in the here and now, to connect with my Creator, with my spirit mentors or guardian angels, whichever term we like to use, to connect with the spirit realm, to have more uplifting thoughts and vibrations. Always remembering that I am a child of God. I forgive myself. I did wrong, but I didn't know. But now I know, and I shall do better. And whether in our mind's eye or physically, embrace yourself as if it were an embrace from a loving, kind friend. And embrace and hug yourself. All parts of yourself are welcome and loved. Let us unite all that is within us to bring harmony. I am a child of God. We are all children of God who wants our happiness. And with this, we pray for the strength, for the guidance, at every moment in our lives to make the best decision, but also to accept responsibility when we do make mistakes and to do better. We thank you, dear Father, Mother God, and our beloved model and guide Jesus, for this moment together. And so be it. Thank you, dear friends, and have a wonderful evening. Bye-bye.